Tender Strands by Martin Dempsey. Chapter 20. Sheet. Oh, while I have you, Precious raised her hand and waved at Cal. Someone else wanted to put another missing poster here. We've been getting so many lately. Cavill, who'd been trying to sneak past before he got dragged into something, froze. He made a sound as if trying to talk, but his throat betrayed him. He cleared it and tried again. Children? Sorry? Precious looked mercifully confused. Missing children? Cavill's voice sounded dry and unusually low. No, dogs mostly. Cavill's head dropped forwards, to be lifted back up quickly with a sudden heightened, breezy cheerfulness. He said, Of course, if there's room on the chalkboard. I wonder if the council's been putting poison down and people's pets are getting it. I used to see foxes every single morning and night around here, but there have been none for weeks now. Or maybe it's cats from the future coming back to ensure they're extinct, Precious said in a humorous tone. She was expecting a rejoinder, but Cavill kept walking, slowly rubbing his arm just above the elbow. His movement seemed unusually slow and deliberate, almost like he was sleepwalking. You can head out early tonight, Cavill said as he walked and rubbed, and timestamp for a full shift. I'm planning to go through some paperwork tonight, so I'll be here. It's always quiet on a Tuesday anyway. I'll say goodbye now, and when you head out, just lock the door and put the ring buzzer sign up before you leave, please. Oh, okay, great, thank you. Precious wasn't surprised, and she'd half been hoping he would let her out early, as he often did when he was working a shift. Last Christmas Eve, the only one she'd worked so far at the company, he'd only kept her there long enough to unwrap the present he got her, and used the work phone to call her relatives abroad. Precious sometimes reflected how the business managed to turn a profit at all, given the way Cavill ran it, more as a hobby than as an enterprise, which gave her a sense of unease. But she'd heard enough to never ask uncomfortable questions unless she already knew the answer was one she wanted to hear. Cavill was such a good guy, however, that even if he was mixed up in anything unsavory, she'd give him a pass. Easy on the eyes, too, but she'd also seen enough not to push any of that on a good employer. Cavill entered his office and sat back in his well-upholstered faux leather office chair. He did work, hard, on accounts and bills, and cleared all the pending red tape, including a couple of pastoral tasks, such as writing up internship recommendations for the children of a couple of his drivers. The young people in question, a young lady by one and a young man by another, had in reality done very little other than to help with a few marketing calls and give the outside of the garage a lick of paint. However, in the university recommendations he wrote, he personally guaranteed that they'd located new avenue streams, streamlined several operational issues, and sourced cheaper supply lines, and was willing to go so far as to manufacture evidence to back the claims up if he'd been asked. Once he heard Precious had left, he made his way to the entrance area to silently watch her get safely to her car from the window before returning back to his office, where he rolled himself a very generous spliff of cannabis, and Lao. Cavill drew a deep lungful and tilted his chair back as far as it went. A habitual cannabis user since his early teens, Cavill has begun to favour Lao above even it. Cannabis made him feel like he was a very young teenager and had just finished a round of exams, and had a new couple of video games to play, and the whole week clear with his mother at work. Lao, however, made him feel like he was a character in one of those games, as if his life was a simple sequence of logical puzzles to solve, predictable dialogue options, fetch quests, and all one had to do was enjoy the experience. It was simultaneously empowering on a personal level while allowing him not to take anything seriously. The whole of reality was merely a simulation he could mini-max or even hack. Cavill dozed, the debris of his mind from the day, the facts and numbers and interactions and plans, slowly washed away by waves of fatigue, and the drugs unpicked the logical connections until it was all a jumble of impressions. Before he could sink too deeply and feel the final drop of sleep, however, a tickle on his face slowly drew him through the layers of consciousness, as if a thin line of thread was attached to a fishhook, piercing his cheek, and he was a catch being reeled in. Cavill opened his eyes to look directly into two pitch-black, reflective, thickly lashed, hard oval gems of Incy. Cavill didn't start. He was used to being woken up by her this way. Often she wanted to be fed, or simply be held and have her back feathers ruffled until she started snoring. This time, however, there was a stillness and intent which caught his attention. He reached up to her back. She was half on his chest and half on the desktop, and stroked her, but she didn't respond like she usually did by snuffling, clacking, and raising and dropping her plume. Something was wrong. Incy? She seemed to withdraw her fangs further under her mask. The effect was to press the knuckles of her fangs together, giving the impression of pursed lower lips. Then they quivered in unison. Cavil was very familiar with how they shuffle when she and the others were hungry or excited. But this was different. Incy? She retreated backwards, paused on his desk, then turned and scuttled towards the rear entrance of his office, pausing by the door and clacking her fangs only once. Cavil got up, brushing ash from the front of his knitted jumper, the rolled cigarette resting in the ashtray on his desk almost burnt to a sub. He crossed to the door and opened it, and Incy scuttled right out across the shop, under several of the cabs, and over to the pit, where she raised one leg, staring at him. Incy? She seemed to wait until he was headed over to her. Then she scuttled onto him. Cavil knew they were usually down there, where the building cellar was. Formerly, prior to the changes he made to the building, it was the bar cellar, then a storage area. Now it was mostly abandoned space, consisting of several bare rooms with walls coated in smooth grey cement, door entrances without doors or frames, rough concrete floors, dusty and stale-smelling. There were also UV lights and several plant pots filled with lao, but Cavil had found lao to be so virulent it could grow in complete darkness. Cavil opened the pit by flicking the plastic-coated release button, and the yellow and black painted elevator lowered, and Cavil climbed down. He couldn't see where Incy had gone. He ducked his head down and stepped off the pit's cage, half hopping to cushion the drop. He'd need to climb back up and out. Once it had been installed, Cavil used the lift to act as a cellar. There was an old tray door somewhere, but it had been so long since he'd used it he couldn't remember if he needed a key or if it was a bolt. He blinked, trying to get his eyes accustomed to the absence of light. Suddenly something flickered on. Across from Cavil, fairy lights suddenly lit up and flashed and twinkled. Little white, bright pinpoints cast light in a pool which didn't light the whole cellar, but which lit one area quite effectively. They were draped around one of the empty double doorways, and as Cavil's eyes adapted, he realized they were not attached to nails or tacked to the wall. They were hanging in a perfect cobweb, and in the center, Arbuckle sat, the light shimmering off his slate abdomen. Cavil drew near in wonder. Was this what Incy wanted to show him? Cavil drew in a breath to express his admiration, which he was going to exaggerate for the sake of Arbuckle's feelings, when he noted Arbuckle's expression. He didn't look proud or excited as he usually did whenever his web caught Cavil's attention. He looked downcast, and as Cavil drew near, Arbuckle did something he'd never done before. He reached out two front legs in the same way Incy did when she wanted to be held. Cavil on autopilot returned the gesture and found himself holding Arbuckle, his ever-bulging lips, which could barely contain his fangs, as if it was cursed with poorly fitting braces, drooling on his shoulder. Cavil lightly rocked Arbuckle, again on autopilot, and looked around in confusion, and noticed Cornetto was staring at him from the bottom of a massive, static whirlwind of flossy white, which formed a column directly under the metal dray doors. His ever-sleepy face seemed even more crumpled than usual, his upper lip working. Cornetto then scampered out of the cloudy, fluffy mass, the contrast between the cherubic face and the rest of his body as startling as always. Cornetto ran over quickly, whimpering as he did, and partially climbed Cavil's leg, stopping at the thigh and wrapping his legs around his upper leg, and burying his face, uncomfortably for Cavil, into his groin. Cavil reached down to stroke Cornetto's head, and awkwardly, and with some force, to turn his face to the side so his cheek was against his hip. He felt Cornetto's face was streaming with tears. Guys, what's... Cavil pivoted, alarmed now, still mostly blind in the dark, the fairy lights underlying this unreality of the situation. Something landed heavily on his back, knocking him a pace forward. Cavil recognized what it was immediately. It was Wincy. Whereas Cavil would usually be annoyed and for the 100th time tell him not to do that, Wincy's harsh, racking sobs that Cavil could feel vibrating through his thorax against his back made chastising him impossible. Cavil tried to tuck a hand behind his back to reach where Wincy was, but it was only to cup his spinners. Wincy's sobs immediately released and increased in depth and persistence. Cavil was now having trouble standing up, Apart from Incy, who was the size of a good-sized cat, the average size of the others was at least that of a Labrador or a child of about 10 years old. Arbuckle squeezed so hard he couldn't get a full breath, and Cornetto's position meant he had to open his legs wide and waddle, and Arbuckle was heaving right in his ear, and his breath smelled terrible like old pennies. Cavil contorted and attempted to jiggle up and down on his toes to provide some kind of rocking in a vain attempt at conversation. It's okay, guys. It's okay. It's okay. Cavil tried to think of something else to say, something else from a playlist of comforting things. I'm here. Cavil heard a hiss and something press against his left calf. Looking down, trying to see around Arbuckle's bulk, Cavil saw Sooty's red splash in the dark. She was pressing herself against his leg. She'd done this before, and Cavil had always simply reminded her to be good, patted her, and then pushed her away with his foot. This time he let her be. Something was wrong, very wrong. He'd never seen them act this way. Arthur! Ince's soft lisp sounded from the other side of the pit's dray. Cavil lumbered over, taking swinging steps, trying to simultaneously balance and cradle his passengers while allowing Sooty to keep pressed against his calf. The sobs and nuzzles continued as he made his way awkwardly around the other side of the dray. Incy was there, the fairy lights flickering off her blue and purple feathers, finding new colours of turquoise, peach, black, pink, yellow and green. She skittered side to side, and then withdrew to the left as Cavil approached, and he saw Judy. Judy was laying flat on her stomach, her legs splayed completely out. Several of them stuck out at odd angles, and one was nearly missing. One side of her head was completely caved in, one of her shoulders lay torn and twisted, hanging on a thread of silk and hair, and one of her human eyes was now replaced with a bloody pit. The heavy scent of copper and saliva hung around her. Her one remaining human eye turned to look at him. There was terror and pain in it. Cavil let out a noise, somewhere between a groan and a sob. Arbuckle's scream cried. Cornetto rubbed his face against Cavil's thigh. Sooty climbed up to his knee. One of Wince's legs wrapped completely around Cavil's neck, and one of the hooks of his paw brushed Cavil's earlobe. Incy turned her head to look at him, her jaws opening and closing. Arthur. He understood. She was asking if there was anything he could do. Cavil moved closer and slowly knelt down. The fabric around his knees soaking up the black blood. His passengers slowly, reluctantly, climbed down off him as he did. They formed a circle around him, pressing against him, faces rubbing themselves against his torso, taking deep, snuffling breaths as if seeking comfort in his scent. Incy moved to sit beside him. Cavil reached out a hand and slowly cupped Judy's head. She immediately gave his hand its weight, and Cavil's thumb stroked her one good fang. A bubble of blood formed from the crack in the top of her head and popped. Judy's good eye seemed to lose focus for a moment, then refocused to seek Cavil. Her legs trembled. Cavil bent forward at the waist and got close to her. It's okay, he whispered. Judy and Cavil's eyes met for the last time, and her remaining human eye slowly unfocused and rolled into the back of her head. Her good fang shivered and then relaxed and lay limp against his hand. Her torso rose and sunk for the last time, and she went completely limp. Cavil's chest rose and fell in deep sobs. Incy raised both her forelegs and let out a slow, deep, lisping hiss. Wincy, Cornetto, and Arbuckle all started crying and sobbing again, and again clung to Cavil. Sooty turned away and buried her face into the floor. After what seemed like an age, Cavil stiffly stood up, his face wet with tears. His charges moved slowly away from him, allowing him to stand. Wincy and Incy cuddled up together. Arbuckle started to take small steps, his movement tracing a small cobweb pattern in the floor. Sooty moved into the shadows and pressed herself against a wall, casting a shadow in the shape of a scared cat. Cornetto just bundled his legs under him and sat, looking awkward and exposed and slightly embarrassed. Cavil felt the urge to start sobbing again, but fought against it. He brushed his hands against his thighs and pulled the cloth of his yoga pants away from his knees. Thoughts and plans started to fill his mind. He couldn't leave her here. She'd start to smell, even worse, and attract attention. He could get a tarp, put her in the boot of a cab, drive out to the park, give her a proper burial. Cavil started to cast about for a light switch, seeming to remember that there'd been lights down here somewhere. "Thank you, Arthur," Incy whispered. Cavil turned towards her. She was now standing apart from Wincy, looking up at him. Cavil's mouth formed a question. "Thank you, Arthur?" Her lisp was less pronounced this time. The statement pointed. The other's cries and sobs slowed, and one by one, they turned to look at him. "Arthur, thank you." Cavil suddenly felt awkward. I... Cavil turned to look at the dray. I could, Cavil backed towards it, away from the multitude of staring eyes. Surely they couldn't blame him for not helping her. No, that wasn't it. Cavil had become quite adept at intuiting what his charges wanted or felt, and he wasn't picking up incrimination. They wanted to be alone. Not able to tear his gaze completely away from the scene, Cavil backed up until he could perch on and then swing his legs onto the dray. As he stood, the others, all apart from Incy, formed a circle around Judy's body. Cavil flicked the switch, which slowly raised the cage upwards into the garage's main level. As he was lifted up and away, Incy turned and raised her forelegs up. Just as his view was intercepted by the cement floor of the garage, Cavil saw Incy drop her arms as if giving a signal, and immediately every one of them flicked their shoulder out in an instant and surged forwards. As the lift continued to rise, cutting him off from them, Cavil pressed his palms over his ears to close out the clacking, the slurping, the humming, the purring, the clack, 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 clacking. Dream Journal. September the 20th. Sea and storm sounds, Tannis vaped together, CBD edibles, 5 HTP times 2 doses, and SSRIs. Yoga session for 90 minutes, cold water therapy for 30. I dreamt I was in a lifeboat with 9 other people. All around us I could hear the drowning, screaming and spluttering. "We should return to save them," said the one wearing a trench coat. "We should figure out our coordinates to best understand where we are," said the one wearing round glasses. "We should return to rescue the children," said the woman in a dress. "We should row away from the crowd before we swarmed," said the pale man in the periwig and blue dress tails. 4 of the remaining 5 turned and exchanged glances. The one was wearing a priestly collar, the one wearing an admiral's uniform, the young pregnant woman, the one in the butler's uniform, all exchanged glances. Finally, the butler's eyes turned to gaze upon his rich employer, who lay passed out drunk on the floor of the boat. The butler started to stomp his feet, left, right, again and again on the board of the bottoms of the boat. Soon the other 4 joined in, right, left, faster and faster, harder and harder, louder and louder. Despite the cries of warning from the others, the 4 kept stamping as if the boards, even as they splintered and the cold water came rushing up from below. And as the lifeboat broke up and sank, the drunkard woke and sat up, opened his mouth to scream, just in time to swallow a mouthful of freezing seawater.